And the only fucking thing that lets people stand by watching all this suffering, doing fucking nothing, is the idea that suffering can be a gift from God. What a monstrous idea, Father. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you. I'm Matt.
And I'm Mel. And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is episode 10 of season 8, and we are starting a new series on Midnight Mass. So join us as we collectively work through some religious trauma.
Well, hello and welcome. We are starting off a new series. As Mel said in the intro, we are just so in love with Mike Flannagan after finishing up The Fall of the House of Usher that we decided we would do one more watch through of his last Netflix series. I think that is the only one that we haven't covered so far is Midnight Mass. And for those of you that haven't seen it before, obviously there are going to be quite a bit of spoilers. We will try to keep it relatively minimal, but it's going to be hard to discuss the episodes without some spoilers. So just know that you've been warned that if you haven't seen it yet, now might be a good time to go catch up on it. It's only 8 episodes and it is really good. You may have also noticed from the intro, Lisa wasn't able to join us for this episode's recording, so it's just Mel and I for this one. But Lisa will be back for the next one, and we do miss her. I know she was sad to miss it because I know she really likes this show as well. But we will soldier on, and we will talk about the first 2 episodes of Midnight Mass. So I'm not going to pitch it to Mel directly, but I am definitely going to say I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this because I know you haven't seen it yet. I believe this is my 3rd viewing of it. Probably, I guess you could call it 3.5. I watched it when it was first released to Netflix. I watched it a second time, and then my wife actually watched it, and I didn't watch every episode with her, but I watched several of them and saw chunks of others. So that's why I'm giving it a half viewing for that, if you will. But I mean, Midnight Mass, it's a Netflix show from Mike Flannagan. It's, I think, to my knowledge, the only Netflix show that he's done that is wholly original. Most of the others have some other source material, be it Edgar Allan Poe or Henry James or Shirley Jackson, as in like The Haunting of Hill House. And I do recall, I believe I read an interview with him or just kind of an overview. And this is apparently something that he has been kicking around for a number of years prior to actually finishing the script and getting the green light to record. I believe in one of the movies that he's made, there's a homage to it, like in just kind of one shot where it's the title of a book kind of in the background or something like that. But apparently this whole series is something that he has been working on steadily throughout the years before finally finishing it and actually doing the filming of it. So the basic plot of it involves this very small island. It's a little ambiguous as to its location, but it feels like it's off the coast of New England or possibly off the Pacific Northwest. But it's a very small island. I think the population is only 100 to 200 people. They are mostly a fishing community. They're not. They're completely separated from the mainland. Like the only way there is to take a ferry to the mainland and back. And the central story, there's lots of stories that kind of intersect in it, but the central thing sort of involves, I don't want to give too many spoilers to Mel, who hasn't seen the whole thing yet, but it definitely involves this new Catholic priest that arrives at the Catholic Church. And I would definitely say, especially based on, the intro that we chose for the episode and many other things, that one of the primary questions of this show is faith and religious faith and how we all deal with it in very, very different ways sometimes. It's starring Zach Gilford is one of the main characters, Riley. Kate Siegel is Aaron. Hamish Linklater is Father Paul Hill. Henry Thomas, who has been in many of Mike Flanagan's works, is Ed Flynn. And then Samantha Sloyan is Bev Keane. And I'm skipping over a few others. I do want to say that of all of these, they all do a great job, but Samantha Sloyan in particular, her portrayal of that character Bev is, I mean, it's just great. I hate the character. It's kind of like Dolores Umbridge in Harry Potter, where the actor playing the role is doing an excellent job to the point where I have seen her in other things since watching this, and it's hard for me to separate the character from the actor. But yeah, we can talk more about that character, I'm sure, as we get going. So, Mel, I'm going to turn it over to you because I am curious about your thoughts on your first watch through on this show.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know why I didn't. I guess the situation probably was like, unlike Hill House and Bly Manor, where I had the adaptation angle to go into it with and kind of, Hill House I was a little nervous about because I love Shirley Jackson, and Hill House I ended up liking it. But Midnight Mass, I guess without the adaptation angle, maybe that, like, I just didn't watch it right away. And then you know how it is. If you don't watch something right away, sometimes it just gets shoved to the back burner and you don't get back to it. But I heard a lot of good stuff about Midnight Mass. So I'm happy to finally sit down and check it out. And I think it's a really, since we didn't do it before, an interesting kind of follow-up, I guess, to our discussion of the fall of the House of Usher. So my impressions, I'm going to try to, I have to say, because I waited so long to watch it, I have just in pop culture and talking to people heard some spoilers, not major ones though. I'm still pretty much, this is kind of a first time going through it for me. Like, I don't have like some full on summary of what happened, but like the monster aspect of it, I guess you would say, or the really horror aspect of it is something that has been spoiled for me, but I'm sure we'll try to dance around it, though I think you can tell what's coming from certain points in the first couple episodes. But other than the fact that, yeah, I have heard some things about it before I finally sat down and watched it. I enjoyed the first couple episodes. Now, this is kind of like we talked about with the fall of the House of Usher. Sometimes things are happening that you maybe like appreciate more than enjoy, I guess. I have to say what happens to the cats and the dog in the show, and that first scene of the car accident were very disturbing scenes to watch. But I think, especially in the first episode, but then also in the second episode after the storm, there's really kind of a scene being set here, like getting us settled in the place the place where this is happening and the folks that we're following. I guess one other thing I'd say about my first impressions are that I often think that small towns are really good for horror, unfortunately. And this is coming from a person who has lived in a small town and then kind of almost like a rural area. So I was outside the small town. And I did not feel like either of those towns are really creepy in any particular way. I was not, I didn't feel like I was in a horror movie. But I think small towns lend themselves really well to horror because of the idea of a small community and everybody knowing everybody else's business, and also the idea that paranoia, the outsider insider, and all the stuff we're getting in the first couple episodes, from the sheriff who's not really accepted by the town, it doesn't seem like, to the kind of the prodigal son returning in shame because of the car accident that resulted in the death of the woman. And then, of course, the religious aspect of small towns, because that's an even smaller community within a small town. And then the isolation is ratcheted up by what you were saying, Matt, that this is an island, and that in itself kind of, I don't know, large bodies of water just creep me out. I do have a fear of like what could be underwater, and being on a little island like that, like the aerial shots, and like there's only like 130 of you there, and you have to like take, the ferry doesn't look like it's a short ride. I'll say that. And that in itself, like at night when the storm comes, or if anything happens, like any sort of emergency, I feel like it heightens, the intensity and the anxiety. Like I'm worried for the woman who is pregnant, really, because there's a doctor on the island, but it's like, I feel like probably for emergencies, they have to go to the mainland. And so if anything goes wrong or sideways, you're kind of trapped in this insular, isolated place that you can't necessarily get away from quickly. And so I feel like the horror is already heightened, not just because of strange things are happening, like some creature apparently is flying over and something's killing the cats and something is calling out to people, and all this stuff is happening in the first couple episodes. But the fact that they're so isolated and alone, I think is really interesting. And also the playing off of the characters who have left and had to or wanted to come back versus the characters who've stayed there. And I agree with you, Matt. Bev is a fascinating character, even though she's very irritating and kind of a terrible person. I mean, she is that type of person who uses religion as like a cudgel for her resentments, against other people, unfortunately. And in this small community and in this small church community that we find ourselves in, like that could seem initially to be, one of the threats. So it's interesting to see how the human threats and the possible creature threats are being mixed together at this point, if that makes sense.
Oh, it totally does. And I mean, Bev using religion as a cudgel, I think, is a great description of it. I would add to that she also uses passive aggression as a cudgel as well. She is a masterclass in how to be passive aggressive. And if you want to be better at passive aggression, you should watch this and take notes, I should say. I wanted to jump back though, because I know you mentioned the disturbing nature of the very opening scene of the show, but having seen it before and watching it again, I think I'm watching this series at kind of a slower mental pace, if that makes sense. Like I'm really trying to take in as much as I can, much more than I did specifically the first time I watched it. I was just in awe of how good it was, but I was like, must keep watching, must keep watching. And like my very first note as I was watching these episodes is about that first scene, about just how great it is in setting up Riley's background with barely a word spoken. I mean, you see him sitting on the curb, you see the flashing lights, the broken glass, you see the EMTs trying to resuscitate the girl who was in the car that he hit. You can infer that he's drunk, but then one of the few lines is from one of the rescue workers who says something to the effect of, it's a shame that the drunks walk away with scratches and the young are the ones that always die in these things. And you also get a sense of his religion because he starts saying a very Catholic prayer, and like that's what kind of prompts the EMT to talk to him. And you cut forward to him leaving prison, and that's where you find that he's lost his faith. Particularly, I mean, we can presume mostly because of the accident and the guilt that he feels, and the fact that his faith did not help him deal with the guilt so much as just sort of I don't know. He doesn't specifically say why he lost his faith, but it's something to do with the time in jail and the accident. I mean, he makes some comments, but why he lost his faith is less of the question. It's more the fact that he has, because like you said, he is kind of set off as an outsider, much like the sheriff, who is him and his son are the only Muslim people on the island, which as a, town of 120, 130 or so, that they kind of stand out like a sore thumb. And not only are they Muslim, but they are ethnically Middle Eastern as well, and also relatively new to the island. So it's not like they've been there for decades. They've only been there a matter of months, it seems. And so it's really interesting, I think, just how much that opening scene conveys and gets across with such minimal like there's barely any dialogue, and it's just, but it's all there. And I don't know. I don't dwell on the opening scene. There's that's like 5 to 10 minutes out of 2 hours worth of television, so I don't want to dwell on it too much. But it was literally the first thing that struck me watching this was that opening scene and going just wow. Like I feel like Midnight Mass is probably, in my estimation, Flanagan's best work, but also I don't know that it's my favorite of his because I have a very soft spot in my place for Hill House. So I love some of the things that he did with that. But like watching this again, it's just really nice and very amazing to like see all the little subtle things that he does. But anyway, like I guess moving forward, was there anything in particular in episode 1 that you wanted to touch on, Mel? I know there's a lot sort of happens, but it's also kind of a preamble. Like there's a reason why it's titled Genesis, like book 1 Genesis, because it's setting the stage for what's to come.
Yeah, I think first off, I just want to say that I agree with you that the opening of the series works really well to ground you in the story without showing you or even having much dialogue. And I agree with everything you were saying about the use of him praying that the girl's going to survive, knowing she's not, ending up paying restitution and being in prison. He gets the Bible, he's in prison, the letter from his mom, which you read. So you get all this information about him. We also see that every night he's haunted, I guess you would say, by memories of the girl that he killed as well. And so, yeah, this guilt is what is kind of, I guess, pushed away from religion. I was thinking too, I think maybe there's also this idea of like that, well, I don't know how to word this, but he talks about how he woke up one day and realized kind of like he was a murderer. And the priest, which is what I want to bring up as our next kind of subject to talk about, tells him in episode 2, basically that, that is not necessarily a reason to lose one's faith. But and the priest also says that he heard from the previous priest, which we need to talk about this too, that Riley was very faithful. And I think that maybe for Riley, the fact that he was praying in that first scene when he realized that the girl was dying, there's also an idea of like, I guess maybe God should have been in control or something. And so that could have been fixed, like the terrible crime that he committed. I don't know, but he's definitely struggling with the fact that he did this and the fact that this is going to be with him for the rest of his life. And he's also struggling with re-entering society, which I'm sure is harder in trying to re-enter such a small society. But he talks about how he has to leave the island, every week for meetings that he has to go to. That it's hard for him to get a job because he has, been in prison, but also because he's on this small island. What is he even going to do? So there's hints that he may help his father and brother with their fishing business, but there's just not many options. We know that economically the island is depressed. People are just leaving and not even selling anything because nobody wants to move to the island. And we find out just in passing, which is also kind of a brilliant move, that there was a tragedy that happened right before Riley left the mainland, which was this, or right around the time of Riley's issue off the mainland, was this oil spill that totally ruined their economy of fishing for a while. And some people are mad at Bev because Bev pushed for them to take a settlement rather than get full restitution. And so we can talk about that later as well. That's the kind of the island-wide tragedy that's playing out too. And so he also, is affected by that as well. But one of the things that I thought going off of his character, another thing we need to talk about is the priest situation. So basically, there's this St. Patrick's Catholic Church, and their priest, we learn, was elderly and sick, apparently, though I don't know that we've been told, what was going on there. Bev was kind of, I guess, helping to keep everything going, which I'm sure put her in a stronger position that she would like, a position of leadership. And the town basically decided that he'd been wanting to go on this pilgrimage to the Holy Land. So before he died, they would kind of send him off. It's like I guess like a vacation. I don't know how that would help you if you were older and sick traveling that much, but to see this place. And so he's been gone, and when he was supposed to get back, this younger priest, uh, Paul, I think his name is, he shows up and has this trunk full of dirt, which, I mean, I think if we know things about the supernatural, we have an idea of possibly something's wrong with him, and he knocks on it and something knocks back. So we don't know exactly what came in the trunk, but I'm just assuming it's whatever's running around with glowing eyes, killing animals and hurting people. And he keeps telling everybody that Pruitt, their previous priest, got really sick when he got back, and he's on the mainland, like in a hospital, and he sent him as a temporary takeover. But then in episode 2, he tells Riley that Pruitt is so sick, it's going to be a long time before he can come back, and maybe he'll never come back. And so we also have the town kind of on tenterhooks because they've been looking forward to their priest coming back, and now all of a sudden this really important ritual to them with this person that they trust has been taken over by this other person. And as the viewer, we also know there's a lot of weird things going on with him, and we also know that Riley has thought he's seen Pruitt during the storm, even though he wasn't able to catch up to him, and nobody else saw him. So the mystery, I guess, the question of where the heck is Father Pruitt is one of those kind of inciting incidents or initial questions of the piece. I think it's also telling that the woman, the doctor's mother, Mildred, who has dementia, goes on and on about how Paul looks like Father Pruitt, and there seems to be something suspicious there. So yes, we have a lost priest, I guess, who's supposedly sick, and we have a new mysterious priest who probably isn't being on the level with these people, and is possibly, because of his weird luggage, connected to the monster on the island. Matt, does that seem like a reasonable kind of explanation of that mystery? So we have Riley's tragedy and his return, but we also have another outsider, Paul, and trying to figure out who the heck he is and what's going on in that situation.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty apt description of the father. It just overall, like his overall arc, especially these 2 episodes, there is a lot of mystery to him, and especially the way that he carries himself is just kind of, I don't know, Hamish Linklater, the actor who plays him, is just phenomenal. I just want to say that first of all. But like there's something about the way he talks to everyone, and like he has this, like he knows more than he should, I guess. And you're right, there's the trunk full of dirt, which very ominous, especially when it knocks back. And but it always seems like what he's doing when interacting with the town folk, be it one-on-one or even, as the priest of their church that most of them go to, like the way he carries himself, it sounds like he's trying to do what he thinks is best for them, but they, of course, don't know who he is. They are not like he is an outsider. He's a new priest, and the way that they kind of drop hints about the fact that the previous priest had been there longer than most people on the island. Most people that are in in their 20s to 40s, I guess. He was the priest when they were kids. And so it is very interesting to watch him navigate trying to enter into this church community, I guess, if you will, since they are so very, uh, I mean, like most small towns, they're used to what they're used to, and they don't seem willing to change, but at the same time, they aren't unwilling to accept him. It's just a very big shock. I think all of them are just completely floored the first time, like when he walks in during the processional for the mass, the first mass that he leads. Like nobody knew he was going to be there except for Bev, who had seen him the day before. But I'm trying to be diplomatic here and not give you any spoilers either, Mel. That's the other thing. But I will say, you're definitely looking in the right direction with some of your questions. Let's say that.
Yeah, I feel like the things I'm asking questions about they have to be kind of planted to have us be curious, but also maybe wary of him. I also thought it was interesting that it didn't take him very long on the island to know everybody's names, even when people who don't normally show up to church, so he hasn't even met them yet, showed up for Ash Wednesday. He made a point of saying every single person's name. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of little subtle and sometimes not so subtle hints that there's something up with him. So I'm looking forward to seeing. I have my suspicions, and I'm looking forward to seeing if I'm proven right.
For sure, for sure. I kind of wanted to talk too about the storm at the end of episode one. I thought that scene was done so well, and there's leading up to the storm, you kind of see some of the tension where you see Bev like really trying to push people to shelter at the rec center for the church. And it's not until episode two that you kind of get maybe a little bit of the reason why, and that's when Riley was talking about how Bev pushed everyone to take that settlement, and then also I don't know that she directly encouraged them to donate to the church, but strongly hinted, I guess. So a lot of them, I mean, they didn't donate their whole settlement to the church, but they donated part of it, which she then used to build the rec center. So it was interesting watching that dynamic first and then seeing why there was this weird tension between her and I think it was the sheriff over where people should shelter if they don't shelter in place at their homes. But the storm itself, I mean, that was just so cool with the cinematography, especially with, Riley runs out into the storm thinking that he saw the priest because he keeps talking about, and this comes up again throughout episode two, that he recognized the coat and hat because the former priest had always worn the same coat and hat, just like kind of like that was his, I don't want to say trademark, but that was his thing. I don't know what I don't know what else to say about the storm except I just like it was really well shot, I guess, if that makes sense.
Oh, I agree. I think it was really well shot, and also it joins the Riley story at the end of the episode to the mystery of what the heck is going on with the priest, which I thought was really good. And then of course it sets up, the weird situation of all the dead cats washing on shore. The next day we have the sheriff and the mayor, of course, well, quote unquote, trying to be nice, is telling the sheriff that he should not go worship at the mosque every Friday, but he should come to St. Patrick's, not because they want him to convert, but because that's where everybody goes, and then he could assimilate, I guess, into the town. Every time somebody talks to the sheriff, they are either outright hostile toward him, I guess, if it's like Bev, or they just basically are just reminding him constantly of his outsider status. But he is trying to call people's attention to the fact that it's not just a random thing of like the time when all the starlings got hurt in a storm and fell on the beach. It's like the cats were not drowned. The cats were not washed out of the island where they all live. It's an island of cats, basically. But their necks are broken, and he says that they had no blood in them. So their necks were broken, and they had no blood before they got messed up in the storm and washed up. So we have another indicator that there's something going on, because we know from episode 1 when the kids were on that island that they saw something that it sounded like, and then we saw as the viewer later one of the cats be attacked. So we have that kind of mystery. And then we have a little bit more, I guess, background about the people on the island.
Well, Mel, before we move on to the other people, and I know that there's a lot to discuss, I did just want to mention that opening scene as well, because that was another one of those like trademark Mike Flannagan just wow kind of shots. He did that a couple of times in Haunting of Hill House, and he really does like this. Most of that first scene is, if it's not a single take, it's shot like a single take, where the camera is following the characters, and then when they stop to talk, it actually like circles around them several times and then continues moving with them as they talk. And it was just another one of those moments that just really, really floored me with just the technical aspect of what he's doing on like the cinematography side of things. And in my notes too, I had also made notes about the mayor pressuring the sheriff. I found that was not surprising, but he did at least try to handle it kind of semi diplomatically. I mean, as best you can when you are trying to pressure someone who's not Catholic to go to Catholic Mass to put on appearances for the good of the town, if you will. I also kind of had a comment, and I had made some notes on this in the first episode, but one thing that they do throughout this series is integrate hymns into the story, where like there will be a montage usually of several different things happening while a very traditionally Catholic hymn plays. And I thought that was really fascinating and really well done in these first 2 episodes. I just really, I'm not one who loves religious music like that, but the way that it was used, I felt was pretty powerful in some ways. Like it just, I don't know, it's just really good. I know the first episode they used the song "Lord Abide with Me," and I didn't write down the name of the hymn used in the second episode, but I don't know. I just kind of wanted to comment on that as well. And
no, I agree with. I just want to jump in and say I agree. I also like the juxtaposition of religious ceremony with stuff that was going on in other people's lives. So, like when we got the communion happening while Riley was at the AA meeting, like it's just really interesting how he kind of merges those, and they kind of almost speak to each other, the secular and the religious.
well, and also too, since you mentioned communion, this is something that I'd actually thought of when we were talking about episode 1, but the opportunity to talk about it just kind of didn't present itself naturally. But I found it interesting the way they convey Riley's relationship with his dad, that very awkward, like adult son with his distant, closed off, father who doesn't even really know how to hug him so much as to kind of pat him on the back when that first night that he's there. But one of the things that I thought was interesting was that conversation they had about communion, because earlier in that episode during dinner, Riley had said that he wasn't really religious. He was, I think, kind of trying to just, skirt the topic with his parents. And his dad makes a comment that, well, then you shouldn't go take communion if you don't believe, or I don't remember his exact wording. And so Riley hangs back from the communion. But come episode 2, his mom does convince him to go get the ashes on his forehead for Ash Wednesdays. And she says it's not a sacrament, it's a blessing. I think it's what she told him. But just so much is done through the subtlety, though, of just kind of the interaction between him and his dad there. That just it's like, wow, that is. I mean, we can't call them a WASP because they're not Protestants, but like just the closed off, unable to really communicate to each other relationship that they have is communicated so subtly that I don't know. I just really like that.
There's a lot of interesting stuff with like parents and children and generations in this show too, which I think lends itself well to small towns. But we have the doctor taking care of her mom, who seems to is elderly and is ill, possibly with Alzheimer's or dementia. You have Erin, who is pregnant, and she makes comments about her mom. It seems like she probably left the island maybe to get away from her mom. It sounds like her mom drank a lot and that they weren't close. But then you've also got Riley and his parents trying to find a rapprochement. And yeah, you also have the idea of the young priest replacing the old priest, I guess. So this kind of generational change and interaction, and also like father-son, mother-daughter interaction, seems to be another theme that's kind of running through the show.
Well, and to put our English degrees to use, what do they refer to the priest as? Father. So
this is true.
I don't want to be accused of reading too much into it, but I do feel like that probably is not overkill to say that choosing Catholicism. I mean, it may very well be that Mike Flannagan himself is or was Catholic, and because I know a lot of this thematically was something that he had like wrestled with himself, so he says. But yeah, I do feel like that is an important thing to point out, that like even the relationship between priest and clergy, I mean, you refer to him as Father Paul. Well, I mean, I guess we can kind of get to that discussion of Riley and Father Paul, because really it feels like they are kind of the two poles, if you will, of the show. I hesitate to call either one of them a protagonist and an antagonist, but they're definitely like either ends of the spectrum. Like one is north, one is south. They are on the poles of this story. One is religion and one is very not religion, and there's lots of things that they have in common, especially regarding their outsider status. But it definitely it's weird the way they talk with each other. There's this weird sort of standoffishness that I feel like I'm picking up, even when the priest sits down with Riley at their little potluck after Ash. I guess it's not Ash Wednesday, but when he sits down on the bench and starts talking to him, like it's this weird, like he's really trying to help Riley, but they're also both kind of really guarded, and it's this weird sort of like back and forth. I don't even want to say dance, but like almost like a verbal sparring, but without any sort of enmity either. Like, did you feel that way, or am I just misinterpreting it?
Yeah, I felt that too. There's almost like an awkwardness, or I wondered too if it had to do because Father Paul mentions at one point that he noticed that Riley wouldn't take communion. Riley admits that he's kind of fallen away during their debate in the rec center. Father Paul says something to the effect of, I know this stuff about your past because Pruitt told me. There is a weird kind of awkwardness between the two of them. I feel like, Riley, having kind of lost his religion, I guess, through what happened to him, I could see how every time the priest comes to talk to him, it could feel uncomfortable or make him kind of become defensive. And then you've got the priest on the other hand, who knows this is a person who, used to be faithful and now is not and has gone through a situation and is like trying to reach out to him, but it's not his priest. So yeah, I feel like maybe that's where like the defensiveness and the kind of trepidation comes in. Because you're right, it's not like they're necessarily like arguing or fighting with each other, but they're coming from two different sides of a situation and trying to talk across that chasm, I guess. Which, I think it's at the potluck when Father Paul says, you shouldn't have to go across to the mainland for your AA meetings. Why don't we hold a meeting here? It'll probably just be me and you, but we could start a group here. And then if other people need it, they can join. And they have the meeting in the rec center, which is where we find out about the oil spill and Bev pushing them that we've mentioned before. I was reading something, I think it was an Entertainment Weekly article, but I was reading a breakdown of how that scene was filmed, them talking to each other in the rec center. And they were talking about how they did it kind of all the way through, and they wanted it to be filmed in such a way that it didn't seem like one was like winning an argument. So if you watch it, it's a lot of times the camera is showing just both of them sitting there looking at each other. When it cuts away to each man who's talking, it's at the exact same level as the other one. Nobody is like, the camera's not looking up at someone or down or kind of, tricking our minds into thinking that this is a debate that can be won. We're just seeing two people speaking two different worldviews, I guess. And I feel like that's the impression I get. It's like what you're saying, Matt, that there's no kind of, I'm arguing this person down. I think Riley even says at one point he's sorry, but he's just going to honestly say what he feels. And Father Paul seems to be okay with that. It's more like they're just kind of to communicate their positions to each other, I guess, than anything else. But I think you're right that like the fact that they're both outsiders also plays a role in how they're going to interact with each other. Because I don't know, Father Paul, there are a couple moments when they talk where I almost feel like Father Paul is like, knows more about Riley than he should, and I could see that also unconsciously giving Riley like, have you been talking to Father Pruitt? Like, what the heck is going on here? And even though Riley left, he's still part of the insular island to a certain extent, so Father Paul would be an outsider to him.
Yeah, and like it's just a really interesting dynamic too, because they're both outsiders, but they're also on opposite ends of the religious spectrum. And so like I like what you were saying though about that scene, how it was shot. I did notice that it really, while there was that sort of awkwardness that was causing tension, it did neither one of the, like, you don't walk away feeling like either one of them has won the conversation, which I think that's probably, without saying too much about what's to come, I think that's important, because there will be some more Riley Father Paul interactions. Hint, hint, surprise, right? No shock there, but I don't know. I guess I kind of lost my train of thought of where I was going with that thought, but I hadn't noticed that consciously. But now that you point it out, like I completely see that, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like it makes sense, and it really does feel like a debate, but a debate where nobody wins. They just sort of both like agree to respect each other's opinions, and I respectfully disagree with you, but there is no clear winner, I guess, so to speak.
Just one thing I kind of wanted to add too was there's an interesting kind of philosophical aspect to their debate as well, which of course I'm sure I don't understand Father Paul's full story, even though I have my suspicions. I'm sure his background is influencing what he's saying, and Riley's is for sure. Because, they're also talking about, one of the themes in this, I think, is Riley's struggle with addiction and the fact that they're in an AA meeting. And they're debating this philosophy of why these bad things happen, like why suffering and horrible things happen to people, or how people lose control, I guess, or however you want to look at it. And the priest, of course, is saying that God can, God, I guess, allows like bad things happen, but God can then turn it around. So like suffering can end up leading to something good ultimately, is what I think. I'm trying to distill it in a way that's respectful of his argument, but also not simplify it. per se. Whereas Riley is like, he's not even sure about AA because he doesn't want to think about a higher power. Like the higher power let him down. He fell away from the higher power and this terrible thing happened. And now he feels like there's no control. It's only him. And so he actually talks about this other method other than AA, where it focuses on the self and figuring out like what is inside that may be triggering the situation. Therefore, you can fight that trigger, I'm assuming, and, not be seeking a higher power support through the process of fighting an addiction or dealing with it. So the priest is very much like I guess, a Christian worldview idea that there is a higher power and bad things happen, but they can be used for good. They can change someone, they can lead to things. Whereas Riley, to him, that failed him when this terrible thing happened, when he did this terrible thing to this other family who lost their daughter, their sister, their girlfriend, wife, whatever, their family member. And so he's basically making, I guess you would say, like an agnostic or even an atheist argument. So I feel like Flannagan wouldn't have put so much emphasis on this debate if that wasn't going to play a role in some of what's to come, a thematic role.
Well, I don't want to say yes or no, but I mean, you might be onto something there.
Yeah, I understand you don't want to spoil.
It's really tough. I feel like this must be how Lisa felt when we were doing House of Usher. Like I want to say, but then at the same time, I definitely don't want to ruin anything for you. So, like, I just want you to be already done with it so we can talk about everything. Let's just skip to the last episode so we can talk about all of them.
Listeners, we're just going to binge it. Next time, Lisa can join us for the last episode.
Yeah, there you go. We'll just skip to the end. No, we're going to take our time. And just like I said, I really am enjoying the fact that, like, the first two times that I watched it, I did really binge it. The first time in particular, it was still during like COVID lockdown. I was working from home. I probably not the best of things to watch, but it had just come out and I loved Mike Flannagan. So of course I was like, well, I have to watch it. And then the second time I watched it, I watched it not in like one sitting, but I watched it fairly quickly too. So I am actually truly enjoying taking it slower. And I've only watched the first two episodes, partly to enjoy them, but also because I know that I remember the broader thematic arcs and certain moments definitely, but there are I want to watch it as fresh as possible, I guess, to not spoil things for you as we go through this. Well, I feel like we probably are getting towards the end of our episode, but there is one big lingering thing that we haven't talked about yet. And Mel, I definitely want to get your input on this. For lack of a better word, I believe you were the one who described it as such, the miracle at the end of episode 2. You have a girl who's been paralyzed, and that's a whole other subplot that we haven't even really touched on. That she had been paralyzed in a sort of hunting accident by one of the other island members, although it's kind of hinted that he was drunk and just shooting his gun kind of thing, and it hit her. The mayor and his wife's daughter, Lisa, has been wheelchair bound this entire episode, or 2 episodes, and during Mass, the priest beckons her to stand up, and everyone is, of course, very confused at first, and she starts to kind of scoot her chair forward, and he backs up until he gets like up a step, and he's like, no, come get the communion. I think it was the blood, the wine, if you will. to which she does. She stands up out of her wheelchair and walks and takes communion. Cut to black, roll credits for that episode. Talk about if this were not on Netflix, if this were a serialized thing, talk about an ending. Waiting for the next episode. But yeah, Mel, what are your thoughts on this actual miracle of healing this paralyzed person?
I didn't necessarily see it coming. Like at the end, well, when he kept backing up, I was like, oh, he's going to try to get her to step out of the wheelchair. But I wasn't thinking, oh, this episode is going to end with this. Um, I feel like so there's a couple things that happen really quickly during the course of the episode that I feel like now looking back, maybe unconsciously prepared me for this when the scene occurred. And one of those things is Riley's mom, Annie, is sewing at one point and pricks her finger, and she realizes that as opposed to me, when I recently found out that I needed bifocals, she realizes that when she looks at her finger, that it's all blurry, but then when she takes her glasses off, it's fine. She can see. And so she's not really wearing her glasses as much, if at all. I mean, by the end of the episode, I believe. And so we already saw someone who had something happen to them, like something changed in that respect. And so at the end, when he was offering her, I can't remember if it was the wafer or the communion wine, when he offers it to her. And remember too, she is also extremely faithful. He talks about how Pruitt told him that she might be his only attendee for daily mass. So he knows it's not just his creepy knowledge of people that he has sometimes that he says he got from Pruitt, but he knows her just because they're together a lot. And in fact, we find out that, Joe, who is an alcoholic and has the dog Pike, injured her because she's with the priest, which she sees him and she's looking at him. And so you can kind of infer something is going on there. But yes, I mean, what a way to end the episode, because we now know between Annie and Lisa that something is going on with people who maybe have had issues seeing now are not having those issues. People who, Lisa's in a wheelchair and cannot walk, but now she can. So there's definitely something supernatural going on. And we've gone from supernatural creature, because right before this too, the Bull, one of the characters, I believe he sold marijuana to the boys at the beginning of this show, but he hears someone using his exact voice, mimicking him, calling him into one of the abandoned houses, and he ends up, we assume, getting taken out now that there's no cats. So we got a supernatural creature on one hand, and then we have possible religious miracle on the other. And something else I think is kind of foreboding that we didn't talk about is, Joe's dog Pike is poisoned. It's really kind of a gross scene at the potluck and dies. And they find out that it was his rat poison. And we know from the earlier in that episode, the previous episode, that Erin saw Bev getting rat poison, and she claimed she was putting it, I think it was in the beginning of that episode, she was putting it around her house and other people's houses to keep varmints away. And so it's implied that perhaps she poisoned Pike because she seemed to not like him. For what reason, we're not sure, because he didn't do anything to her at the beginning of the show. And then we know that Lisa and her parents don't like him, obviously, for what happened to her. So I guess that, at this point when Pike is dying, Joe looks at them, he looks at Bev, he looks at some other people. We know that there's this mystery now of who hurt the dog. I lean toward Bev because she's such a terrible person, but we now have Bev linked to poison, which I imagine, knowing Flannagan, that's not just a throwaway point, and it's probably not going to be just with the dog either. So yeah, I mean, I think that's another thing about what he's doing here with the show is everybody's lives are so interconnected that anything that happens to one person can be traced back through all these different relationships and past things that happen. And he just drops them in like they would be dropped in a small town. And we kind of, suss things out as viewers. So Yeah, I was tempted to keep watching, after that happened when she walked. I was like, oh, I'm gonna watch the next one. But I was like, no, I don't want to watch ahead because if I do, I might start talking about things in the podcast that are beyond where we stopped. I'm trying to hold myself to just the 2 episodes at a time.
Well, I definitely agree about the way that information is revealed, like organically through the show rather than just Mike Flannagan putting on an exposition glove and punching you in the face with it. His subtlety with storytelling as well as camera work is just phenomenal. And that's why I always am looking forward to the next thing that he's doing. Like he's great. But yeah, I think like that's probably, I mean, we've made it to the end of the episode and I don't really have any other thoughts either. I think this might be a good place for us to just go ahead and wrap up. But yeah, that's the first 2 episodes of Midnight Mass. We'll be continuing on. I do have a correction. I misspoke earlier when I said there's 8 episodes. There's actually 7. So for those of you that were keeping track, if you were, I did misspeak there. But yeah, if you have any thoughts, even if you want to send hate mail because I gave the wrong number of episodes, reach out to us. We're at No Fearcast on Twitter and Instagram, and we also have a Facebook page. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we're doing, please consider supporting us on Patreon. We do have several seasons worth of mini episodes that are available for you if you do donate. We've put a pause on production of new ones for the time being, but there's quite a few backlogged there. Or you can simply rate and review us, which is entirely free, and it really does help other listeners find us. Theme music is by Nicholas Gasparini, and we will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.